In a story on the front page of today's Telegraph, Peter Kyle has told Ofcom, the communications regulator, that it needs to apply far more pressure on social media firms and tech giants in order to protect children online. The threat from the government being that unless Ofcom and therefore these big tech companies take significant action, they're considering an Australian-style ban on social media for all under 16s.
So he seems to be setting Ofcom a series of priorities. Top of those is to ensure methods are what are described as bait into the platforms to prevent children accessing harmful content around suicide, self-harm and violence. He's also told Ofcom that the age limit of 13 for signing up to social media sites, something which is currently very easy to get around, Gordon, you and I will know that, having our own children, needs to be more rigorously enforced. He did confirm and told Charles Hymas, our Home Affairs editor, that he's speaking to Australian legislators where they have said they want to have a world-beating ban on social media for under 16s. And it is going through the Australian Parliament as we speak. Let's just go into a few stats, though, Gordon, before we get into the actual debate about whether this is a good or bad idea.
Well, the Ofcom says that the average age at which children get smartphones is going down. They say 9 in 10 children own a mobile phone by the time they reach the age of 11. Nearly a quarter of UK 5 to 7-year-olds now have their own smartphone. And many children are lying about their age to use social media below the age that most apps require, which is 13. And almost 3/4 of teenagers between 13 and 17 have encountered one or more potential harms online.
Yes, having a look at a House of Commons report on the impact of smartphones and social media on children. In terms of that impact, it says that almost 3/4 of teenagers between the age of 13 and 17 have encountered one or more potential harms online. And that's the thing that Peter Kyle is talking about. And also 3 in 5 secondary school age children have been contacted online in a way that it is said potentially made them feel uncomfortable, and that there is a blurred boundary between the lives children lead online and the real world.
So we want to ask firstly, should we ban social media for under 16s, as Peter Kyle has suggested? And also, do we go for an even more drastic solution and look at banning smartphones for children altogether?
Seems to me, Gordon, almost impossible to ban smartphones and social media for young people. My sense is that genie is out of the bottle. I remember someone saying to me about artificial intelligence and people who are worried about artificial intelligence and it should be regulated. And he said that's like regulating maths. It's just a thing. Smartphones and social media in the same way are things. I think that if you think back to when we were young, there's a tendency, I feel, Gordon, to slightly over-romanticize our lives before smartphones, that we had these sort of wonderful times reading books and playing conkers and riding our bikes and never any mental stress and no bullying.
My childhood exactly.
Sure it was, Gordon. But, there was no sort of mental stress and there was no bullying and there was no, fights in the playground and there was no sort of, bad discussions and bad adults, stalking kids and all sorts of things like that. And that's certainly not true. I do feel I'm on the more liberal side of this debate. I believe that smartphones and social media have brought great riches, particularly for young people. I think it's democratized the idea of who communicates and how do you communicate and how can you really engage with the world around you. I do think it has uncovered, and there are some very unpleasant and dark parts of social media. But my sense is we are seeing the fox that when we were young, Gordon, was totally hidden. We didn't know of these things, and now, of course, they are being rocket boosted by social media, and that is a problem. But I can't see how we can roll back from where we are with social media. I think the big issue is the platforms themselves and responsibility. And I remember interviewing Mark Zuckerberg, obviously the founder of Facebook that is now Meta. And this was in, I think, about 2015. And he had no idea about the sense of social responsibility and the power he wielded. He simply saw Facebook as a social good, democratizing power, giving power to the crowd, the wisdom of crowds, this very positive idea that if you could just allow all these discussions to flourish, we'd live in this wonderful world.
Also, Facebook was essentially an idea that came out of getting people at university together to be able to contact each other. It was almost a sort of university.
It was a dating
thing.
site, wasn't it?
Sort of,
initially.
Yeah. And funnily enough, I was at a dinner last night where I was. It was an alumni dinner, and I was sitting next to somebody who was a student now, and I was telling this chap about how we used to communicate when I was a student, and it would have been the same for you probably. That we used to leave notes on people's doors. You know, you had a pinboard on your door. You would leave a note saying, "Shall we meet in the bar at 6 or whatever?" That was because there was no other way of getting hold of people. He thought it was hilarious, but that was sort of what Facebook was meant to replace, I think. And then it's grown into this thing that, as you've said, I don't think Zuckerberg ever really knew what it was going to become. I don't agree with you on the idea that it's just something that we've just got to live with. I think that children's childhoods have been worsened by social media, and I say that because I've got 3 kids, you've got 2. Everybody I know will tell you that they have at least one child now who just spends their whole time in their bedroom. They can't get them out of their room. They just stay in their room all the time on their phone. That is not a healthy state of affairs. And I think that the problem is that parents, 2 things that are driving the use of smartphones and the parents' inability to restrict them. One is that they don't feel that they don't have the strength to be able to say to their child, "You're not having what all the other children have got," partly because they're worried their child will get bullied if they're the odd one out, and that is a very real and fair concern. But also, I think a lot of parents like the fact that their child is carrying a tracking device. So they can. You were talking about going out on your bike. Well, we did do that. You did it, I'm sure. I used to go off on my bike in the morning, and I'd come home at tea time. My parents had no idea where I was. This is when I was at primary school, and no parent would do that now. And they like to know where their children are at all times, and they can see where their children are because they've got a smartphone in their pocket. So it's a very complicated issue, but I do think that there are things that could be done, and I think that probably a lot of parents are crying out for some sort of either legislation or at the very least rules, so that it makes it easier, I think, for parents to be able to say to their child, "No, you can't have that, and here's why."
I think there are lots of unintended consequences with law here. I actually agree with you, Gordon, that parental controls on phones, of which there are myriad, you can turn any smartphone into a bog standard old-fashioned brick phone with hardly any smart capabilities. That is very simple to do. Yeah, kids might be able to get around it, and there are all sorts of ways of doing that, but nevertheless the powers are there for the parents. I think the platforms should do so much more to take responsibility for the horrors they have launched. You're absolutely right. The horrors of some social media and the effects on so many young people are disgusting. I completely agree with you. I was looking back at evidence, again, just going back to Zuckerberg and Meta again, because I think they've been some of the poorest in this area in terms of responding. And we've seen the cases of young girls in particular who've seen horrific material on, for example, Instagram. And I remember watching Mark Zuckerberg, I think it was last year, was giving evidence before Congress in the United States. And the Republican Senator, Ted Cruz, asked this direct question. He said, "Mr. Zuckerberg, what the hell are you thinking?" And then he showed Mark Zuckerberg, who was giving this evidence, an Instagram prompt that warned users they may be about to see child sexual abuse material, and then asked them if they wanted to see the results anyway. So it didn't then stop it and close it down. It prompted you to say, did you want to go further? And Zuckerberg gave the most, it was the most... he gave the most unconvincing answer when he said that the basic science behind it is that it's often helpful, rather than just blocking it, to help direct them towards something that could be helpful. This is just a total mess. The power that they have and the way they have regulated themselves are so at variance. That is the major problem. My worry about legislation and banning is that this will become like a kind of contraband thing that some kids will have and some kids can't. And I just cannot see, speaking to my children now in their 20s, we were relatively liberal parents with smartphones, and maybe a bit of that is because, of course, we didn't really know the social media effects when our kids were teenagers, and it was only quite new in those days. But I think they would both argue that there is just no way you can take away this way of communicating, the way they communicate with each other, the way they communicate with their parents, the fact that they can always be on, and the fact that a lot of the material that is on these platforms, not just Meta, but also alphabet platforms, Google and YouTube and TikTok, of course, differently from that, and Snap and all the others, can be very positive. The fun you have on it, the joy you can have on it, but the harms have to be controlled.
Yeah. I kind of feel as though you're making the same argument as people make about legalizing drugs, that it's out there, you can't control it, you may as well just make it all free, legal, and
I don't agree with that, by the way, Gordon, at all.
Yeah, okay, but
I don't agree with legalization of drugs.
It feels like a similar argument that we can't do anything about it, therefore we shouldn't try. I think we should try. I think also you talked about parents being able to put lots of settings on phones to restrict usage. That's kind of assuming that the parents know more about these things than the kids do, which, as you and I know, is never the case. The kids will always know more about the technology than their parents do. So I think that's always going to be something they can get around. And again, sort of to go back to the drugs argument a little bit, with we all know that there's a huge problem now with cannabis, that especially with anyone over the age of, 13 or 14 nowadays. And similarly, you could just say, well, they all do it, there's nothing you can do. Doesn't mean that you shouldn't try and stop them. And it also doesn't mean that it's not helpful as a parent to be able to say to them, well, what you're doing is illegal, therefore don't do it.
I'll just say to that the harms of drug taking are super, super clear. The actual harms, as the chief medical officer said a number of years ago now, so possibly we should obviously be relooking at this, as Peter Card has said the government will do, still inconclusive. The actual data evidence about the harms of social media has still really got to be bottomed out. But let's catch up with somebody who very much is maybe slightly more on your side of the argument, Gordon. This is Daisy Greenwell. She's co-founder of the campaign group Smartphone Free Childhood. We wanted to talk to her about moves towards much stricter restrictions on smartphones.
Daisy, thanks for joining us on the Daily Tea. Smartphone Free Childhood began with a WhatsApp group, which very quickly went viral. What made you start it?
Yeah, it all kicked off in February by mistake, basically. I had an 8-year-old at the time, and so did my friend Claire, and people in their class were starting to get phones. We felt really, really worried about that and thought, we don't want to do this, and how can we not? Because it feels almost impossible not to if everyone else is. So we just decided to start this WhatsApp group for each other, and it was just the two of us for a few days. And then I posted about it on social media, and it went viral, and thousands of parents joined, and we realised we were far from being alone and being concerned about this issue. And since then, there's now, it's just grown massively. There's groups in every county in Britain. There's 150,000 parents in the community.
Wow.
And it's all just, it's just kicked off. I think it's tapped into something.
Gosh. So tell us what you would like. What would be your ultimate goal? If you could sit down with the government and say, here's what I want the end result to be, what would that be?
I think it would be for parents to feel like they have a choice and are able to parent their children in the online world just like they do in the real world, given their own beliefs and values. Because at the moment, the minute your child is in the digital world, you lose all kind of ability to create the space that you want for them, and it's a complete Wild West. So yes, I think that raising the minimum age of social media to 16 would be a brilliant first step.
Okay, but you're not aiming for a full-on ban on smartphones for under 16s?
No, we don't think that that would be workable or realistic. But we think, the main thing that we're trying to do ultimately isn't a sort of a government thing. It's to change the culture around kids when kids are given smartphones, and so that every parent knows that they have an option, they can wait, and that there are other solutions and other parents out there doing the same thing.
At the moment, Daisy, I mean, Gordon and I have been discussing this before, chatting to you. All three of us are parents. Do you think that parents, we maybe have all been, as parents, guilty of giving our children smartphones and access to social media far too easy? Frankly, often because many of their friends have access, and we want our children to have the same access and the same ways of communicating with their friends as everyone else does.
Well, yes, in one sense, of course, it is parents that are giving this to children, but I don't think blame should be part of the conversation. It's the air that we all breathe now. We've walked into this situation where everyone has smartphones. It's been only 15 years since we've had smartphones, and now, the proportion of people and children that have them is huge. And a part of that is down to the fact that there's literally no advice out there at all for parents or guidance around what age is a good age, how young is too young. And then the network effects of these devices, the huge marketing spend, and the impossibility of being the only one, leaving your child without. The choice for parents at the minute is either you do give them one and you know all the harms that they can experience on that phone, or you don't. And you really risk them being ostracized and bullied for not having a phone. It's a clear case where government needs to intervene and help parents to be able to make better choices and to take an alternative route, because right now it's just not a safe space for children.
How would the government be able to achieve what you want to achieve, i.e. how can the government regulate social media? Obviously, we're talking about international companies here. We're not talking about companies that are based in Britain. So practically, what can the government do to restrict social media use by under 16s?
Well, I think that the first step would be to, as Peter Carl said in his interview today, actually get big tech companies to enforce their own minimum age limits for social media. I mean, the numbers of kids who have social media accounts and are on social media is absolutely gigantic. The big tech companies are making an incredible amount of money from this, so they're not putting any of their gigantic incomes towards fixing that problem. They say it's a bit complicated, we don't know how to do it. They know more about us, these companies, than we know each other. They can definitely put some of that money towards figuring out how to keep under 13s off their platforms. I think they made 11 billion in 2023 in the US alone from selling the data of minors. So it's not really in their interest to do it. So that's why we all need to come together, governments and people and parents and schools, and say, we've had enough. This is not good enough. Sort this out.
Hard agree with that, Daisy. I mean, my issue is really with the tech platforms who have built this system, much of it around appalling content. I mean, Gordon and I were talking that there are some positives. I believe there are some positives around social media, and obviously some positives around smartphones, which, as you say, Daisy, you're not trying to ban. But the tech platforms have dragged their feet year after year after year, because exactly as you say, Daisy, it's an incredibly profitable business for them. It is their business, and their business is not the moral need of societies or the need of parents and children. Their business is dollars, their business is pounds, and their business is profit. I suppose, Daisy, the issue is, and with Donald Trump coming in America, for example, are the tech companies really going to be brought to heel by governments? They seem to be more powerful than governments. So I totally agree wholeheartedly, Daisy, with your point around the tech platforms need to be obliged to take responsibility. But I feel rather bleak about the actual chance of that happening.
I know at times it does seem like an insurmountably huge problem. But then I think, ultimately, the people that work at these companies are parents too. And of course, any corporation doesn't have the well-being of children at its heart, because their aim is to create money. But if you get enough people around the world And at the minute there are uprisings of parents all across the world. Like there are 25 more smartphone-free childhood groups alone that have sprung up from Uzbekistan to Kenya in the past few months. It's crazy. This is a problem that parents everywhere are just so concerned about. And ultimately, we're all just people, big groups of people. And if we can get together enough, and then I don't see any reason why they can't change. It's very possible for them to change. And I think one of the biggest problems we face is resignation. People saying it's too difficult, we can't do it. This is just the way it is right now. All through history, we've seen examples where a new thing has come out. People have realised some years down the line that it's really dangerous and that we need to make it safe for children or for whoever. Seatbelts. It was a classic example of huge arguments through Parliament about getting seatbelts in cars for years, and now we have seatbelts, and the number of less deaths each year is massive. So I don't believe that it's not possible. It's definitely possible.
Have you managed to have any conversations with people in government, or indeed with any of these social media companies?
We've had various conversations with different ministers and people in government, the previous government and this government, and there's definite interest in doing something about it. I think they're all nervous about how they tackle big tech, because as you say, there are these just huge corporations, but it feels like it's just hotting up. The conversation is not going anywhere, and different governments around the world are looking at each other to see what each other are doing. Everyone's eyes are on Australia right now. Peter Carl says he's watching with very great interest to see what they'll do. So yeah, we haven't spoken to any tech companies though, but we'd be really interested to, because they're more able to sort this problem out than anyone else.
I was just going to say, is it just social media companies that you would want to target, or does it go beyond that? Because clearly there is a lot of harmful content that children can see on their phones that goes beyond what's on social media platforms. Are you looking to go beyond just the Facebooks and the Twitters and Instagrams?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely see the smartphone itself as as social media is one part of it, but the smartphone itself and the internet browser and the pornography and the cyberbullying and all this stuff that can happen, the smartphone is a gateway to all of that. So I think our main focus is on addictive and predatory design. The Online Safety Act already focuses on the most extreme harmful content, and I think the concerns of all the parents in our community is just how as soon as you give a child a smartphone, and that childhood gets swallowed up by the smartphone, because the whole business model is for engagement. The more engagement, the more money they make, and so that just creates a really unfair battle between your child, and this company who spent billions on amazing teams of engineers to make everything as frictionless and sticky as possible. And it's an impossible fight for parents and kids and against those companies in Silicon Valley. So that's our main focus.
I'm reminded of the engineer who invented the infinite scroll, saying that he wished he had never done that, because the idea that there's something just underneath where you are which could be amazing is part of, as you say, I love that phrase, the addictive design of social media and digital platforms. Daisy, for a successful campaign, obviously you want to have staging posts. Can you just, Daisy, what would you like the next 6 months to look like? I'm interested in the fact that you've not been able to yet speak to the technology platforms themselves. And I wonder, Gordon, speak to our production team whether we should facilitate something like that and see if maybe we could work together at getting some kind of round table as part of our role in this debate, because we've all got skin in the game, so to speak. But Daisy, have you got a plan for the next 6 months or a year? Or are you, as you say, you just came together as a group of concerned parents? I think you're speaking to us from Suffolk today. You've got your woolly hat on. It's obviously a bit chilly where you are. What next?
Well, whilst advocacy is obviously, and what governments are doing, a big part of this, we know that this takes years. So our main focus is our community and this movement of parents who are all so engaged and so active in their communities. So we're creating sort of the things that they need to make change in their local areas and their schools. One of the main things that we've released 2 months ago is this thing called the Parent Pact, which is a way for parents to sign up and join together in delaying getting their child a smartphone. It takes 30 seconds to sign up, and then you can see how many others in your child's year group and their school and in the whole county have signed up. And we've had 75,000 kids signed up in the past 8 weeks. So that's just a really easy way for people to connect with other people in their area, because in our WhatsApp groups, you can then meet those parents. And the thing is, if your child knows that 5 others in their class won't be getting a phone for a few years, then they're fine to wait. That peer pressure just instantly dissolves. Yeah. So one of our main things is just the grassroots movement building and action in our areas. We're also helping with the Safer Phones Bill, which is going to be debated in Parliament on March the 7th with Josh McAllister, MP, and that is focusing directly on the addictive design of these devices. Is
there a desire, do you think, from some children, to be relieved of the sort of burden almost of having these devices? From what you were saying there about children signing up, and if other kids don't have them, are you finding that there are children who kind of wish they could not have this, but they almost feel as though they have to because of the peer pressure? Is that something which is you're seeing?
Definitely. Yeah, I mean, ask any teenager that you know, if none of their friends had social media or a smartphone, would they agree? And you know, a really high number of them will say yes. And they kind of, there's this whole sort of nostalgic thing of like, it's a big trend now to look at videos on YouTube of schools and life before smartphones. Yeah. You know, I think they recognise what is being done to them and how that they're the product and how their time is just being sucked up. Nobody's looked back and said, oh, what a great day I just had spending 5 hours on TikTok. You know, they know that it's not great, but they also don't know how to unhook themselves from it. Yeah. Because they know they're going to miss out on what the stories are amongst their friends if they're not there. And teenagers are so wired for peer approval, it's almost impossible for them. So I think a lot of teens, like 1 in 5 teens, say that social media makes their life not worth living. Wow. I mean, it's really awful stats when they're polled about how they feel about it. So I think, yes, they would love any opportunities and the help that governments and parents can give them to somehow dissolve the situation.
There'll be people listening to this who aren't parents or who are maybe grandparents who aren't dealing with teenagers, who might just be thinking, why don't the parents just be stricter? What is the problem here? You just need to tell them, no, the problem is that parents nowadays, they won't say no to their children. What would you say to those people?
Yeah, we hear that a lot, and I can see how someone who hasn't been in this situation doesn't understand it. And I didn't understand it until my daughter got to that age where kids are suddenly getting phones in their class. But if your choice is to have your child crying because their friends are just going out without them, they're not involved in any of the meetups, they're not on the apps that all the stories are being told about, and they're feeling like they're excluded. You know, nobody wants their child to be unpopular and to be miserable. So that it feels like that is your choice as a parent, and I think any parent would understand that if they experienced it.
I think not only for younger people, but for many adults, I think we probably do without a bit of social media time. Goodness knows I waste enough time on my phone, and maybe you do as well, Gordon. I'm sure you don't, though, Daisy, because you'll be well in control.
I absolutely do.
Look, Daisy, I think it's a fascinating debate. Thank you so much for joining the Daily Tea. Let's very much keep in touch on this issue. It's a big talking point for you and for the readers of all of our Daily Telegraph products. So thanks so much, Daisy, for joining the Daily Tea.
Thank you.
Yeah, really interesting from Daisy. We could have talked about that for absolutely ages, and I think we will, as you say, we'll keep coming back to it because it affects so many people. And I think one of the interesting things you and I were just discussing was that it's been so sudden, hasn't it? I've got 3 kids. They're 29, 23 and 20. My 20-year-old is, the one who has sort of been the most affected by this, the one that spends the most time in their bedroom. The other 2, not so much at all. And it has all happened quite suddenly. And I don't think parents were at all prepared for what was about to come.
Yeah, and as Daisy said, no advice, no guidance, no regulation on such an important change, which, digital immigrants like us, i.e. we entered a space that didn't used to exist, as opposed to digital natives. That has happened so rapidly with little discussion. And I think we've gone through this conversation before. Exactly the same with the internet. The internet started as this wonderful thing that was going to connect universities. It then became a sewer. Yeah. social media became this thing where you could share stories from all around the world, and wasn't that wonderful? Daisy just reminded us, as we were just chatting after our interview, on Instagram, you used to get, that's it, you're all caught up.
Yeah.
This idea that you could finish social media.
I've done the internet.
Yeah, of course, that's now no longer possible because the tech platforms don't want you to leave their platform, and they've worked out how to do that. We will definitely make every effort to involve Daisy in any connections we can make with tech firms. I think we should be using our powers as journalists to be able to enable that. And also, we are going to work towards this March the 7th bill, which is the smartphone bill, which she discussed, and we should be looking at that as well. So that's our pledge to Daisy and others so concerned by this.
Yeah. And the other point I think she made, which we've talked about before, is one of my real bugbears, is this idea that the tech firms just say, "Oh, we can't do anything about it. You know, it's too complicated."
Yeah.
And these firms don't have a God-given right to exist. It's like, oh, sorry, we can't. Well, okay. Well, if you can't fix it, then you need to shut down.